number 10 spot, we have a Mexico circus demon. This demon story takes place in Mexico in 1942 and is a son recounting his father's story from when he was 20 years old. The father and his younger brother went to check out the circus that had just arrived in town. They were most excited to see the freak shows, but after checking them out for a while, there wasn't really anything that was piquing their interest. They met a couple girls and they were about to go check out some music when a man wearing a dinner jacket came up and started talking to them. He said he was the greatest illusionist in the world and that he could show them a trick both scary and amazing. He also said that he wasn't actually part of the circus and that he had auditioned, but they said his act was so frightening they couldn't allow him in the circus. The father and his brother were both very intrigued now and asked to see the trick, and the man said he could only show them if they came to his trailer, which wasn't too far away. In 2021, we know that you never go to a stranger's trailer, but they all followed the man in this story. Once at the trailer, the man begins his trick. He holds up his right hand and then puts a white glove on it. He then waves his left hand around his right, wiggling his right fingers and chanting some words that the guys didn't understand. He then asks if they're ready. The guys reply yes, and the man pulls the white glove off of his hand, revealing his hand as only a skeleton. The man even went as far as to grab the father's head with his skeleton hand to prove it was real. The boys of course got out of there as quickly as possible. Spooky demons, but this story that was posted on Reddit might just make me think a little differently. They explained that a few months ago, one of their friends brought over a Ouija board. There were around 5 of them at this sleepover and they all began playing around with it and asking questions, and that is when they met Joe. After about an hour of questions and answers with Joe, one of the girls asks, "Joe, are you a bad spirit?" Joe answered, "N-O, okay. That's good." But then Joe spelled out H-I-M. The girls asked him who he was talking about, and that's when he spelled out the words "he's coming" and started to spell out ZOZO, which, if you aren't familiar, is one of the worst Ouija board demons you could possibly encounter. That ended up being the end of the Ouija board experience for the girls that night because how terrifying, but they decided in the morning to try again. This time, they began speaking to someone who apparently claimed to be Joe's wife. They asked her if Joe was a bad spirit, to which she quickly replied, "Y-E-S." In our number 8 spot today, we have the dog. This story starts off with the storyteller, who we'll call Alicia, and her friends playing with a Ouija board in the backyard. She explains that they did end up contacting someone, and this is when one of the friends, who was also there, decides that it would be a good idea to insult the name of this entity. I don't know about you, but I certainly would never risk it. I'm not trying to be haunted for the rest of my life and my afterlife just because I thought I was smug. Anyway, when the friend throws this insult out, the fence behind them immediately starts to rattle. This was enough to convince them that it was time to pack up and head back inside. They all headed for the door, but Alicia's dog stopped at the bottom of the stairs, which was already unusual behavior. When they turned to look at the dog, they found him standing there just snarling, looking at something that he could see out in the darkness. I'm sure hoping that the person learned not to insult people who lay on the other side. In our number 7 spot today, we have Blanche. This story comes from the Reddit user Turtleshell Magic, and it involves their friends M and L. So one night, the 3 of them were at M's house and decided to crack open the good old Ouija board for a little spooky fun. They contacted some sort of spirit whose name was Blanche and who lived sometime in the 1800s, and everything was going well until M asked Blanche how they died, and she replied with the word killing. M asked how they had been killed, and Blanche said, "Not I." From there, everything started to get really heavy and the room just felt different. All of a sudden, the board was ripped from their hands and went flying across the room. They stopped playing immediately, but I don't think that they closed everything properly. After this incident, M's mom passed away just a week after from an illness that no one knew she had. Not long after this, Ella's mom was hospitalized, and then shortly after that, Turtleshell's mom had to have emergency surgery. Maybe this was all just some horrible coincidence, but Turtleshell says that since then they have experienced things that they think are directly related to what happened that night. Things like hearing voices, dark shadows, hearing footsteps. They find themselves wondering if they're still haunted despite it having been 9 years since that night. In our number 6 spot today, we have the devil. This is a story that is actually the one that caused this person to swear off Ouija boards for the rest of their life. They say the experience was so terrifying it made them completely lose interest. They explain that halfway through their session in this particular circumstance, they ended up contacting a new spirit who claimed to be the devil. I personally would like to hang up that call for sure, especially when this person explains that the spirit seemed to be annoyed that it was being disturbed. Like, so sorry, no problem, I'll go. The storyteller explains that after receiving several messages from the spirit that said, please stop, and then stop, which for the record I would have listened the first time, but apparently they just kept going because they say that suddenly the temperature dropped, just like you see in the movies. From here, the spirit gave them a message that read, if you do not stop now, I will fill the room with the most evil spirits. They definitely took that one seriously and decided it was best to stop, and simply has never gone back. In our number 5 spot today, we have the thrifting find. One day this Reddit user found a real old school wooden Ouija board at a thrift store. I probably would have run in the opposite direction, but they ended up purchasing it. Later that evening, they and a friend decided to try it out and asked a few questions but never got a response. They of course got bored and left the Ouija board out on the bed and headed out of the house to go and get some snacks. This was all fine until they came back to the house. When they got back, they realized that the planchette was now moving, but completely on its own. The word foul was being spelled out over and over again, and the two just stared at it in absolute awe. Eventually they grabbed the board, broke it in half, and covered it with salt before they got rid of it in a safe place. I definitely think that experience was probably the last time they ever used a Ouija board. In our number 4 spot today, we have persistence. This story is from someone with the username Amara Lachey, and they wrote, quote, my cousin was heading to a party with a Ouija board in the trunk of her car for all of us to use. On the way to the party, she got in a car wreck. She was fine, but her car was totaled. So obviously, instead of going to the party, she went back home. When she opened her closet to get ready for bed, the board was somehow back in the closet. She burned it after that. Honestly, that is the only truly good response to having something like that happen. I'm just glad she was okay, and hopefully that board never came back again. In our number 3 spot today, we have signs. This story starts out like many of the others on this list. A group of friends just casually trying their hand at contacting the paranormal. You know, that stuff that most of us do on weekends. The friends felt as though they had contacted someone, but they wanted to be sure, so they said, if you're here, give us a sign. They all stood there and nothing happened, which made them doubt the power and ability of the Ouija board. Just as they were beginning to laugh at the board, they received a sign that the entity was with them. This came in the form of lights flickering on and off for minutes at a time. It didn't stop here though. They also could hear footsteps stomping above them despite being the only ones home. Safe to say they were sufficiently spooked and apologized for ever doubting whatever entity they came into contact with. In our number 2 spot today, we have the following. This story starts out when this person's mother began to get interested in things like card reading and the occult, and she began trying to speak to spirits. One day she was using a Ouija board, and when the storyteller touched the planchette, it is said that it flew right out of his hand and smashed against the wall. This happened when he was a teenager, but since then, nothing has been the same. They explained that from then on, in the night, they could feel something looking at them from the darkest corner of their room, like some sort of shadowy figure. You can't really see because it's dark and it's nighttime, but you know it's there. Throughout their life, even after moving to different homes, they have seen things in the places they live that seem to be following them anywhere they go. In our number 1 spot today, we have I See You. This story comes from a Reddit user called No Springs. One day they were at a friend's house having fun and goofing around, and they decided to bring out a Ouija board. They weren't getting very many results and weren't really taking it seriously, but then they got a message from the board saying, I can see you through the window. And then another after that said, I can see you through his eyes. There was a small window in the basement room they were in, and through that window they could see the backyard, the driveway, and the woods that lay behind it. They continued to ask the spirit questions and ended up getting an answer that said, I'm under the car. Somehow they were able to muster up the nerve to go and check under the car with flashlights. When they looked, they found a huge black stray cat hissing. This obviously terrified them, and they all ran back into the house as quickly as possible. At the exact moment they get back inside the house, all of the power shuts off, the lights go out, and it's completely dark. After that, it's safe to say that they stayed up all night, unable to sleep, and they definitely never played with a Ouija board again. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Theophilus of ADANA.
Okay, so to start off this list today, we are taking it a little bit back all the way to 538 AD. Theophilus of ADANA was a cleric in the Roman Catholic Church. So basically, one day he was elected to become the new bishop, but he ended up denying the offer, as it is said that he wanted a more priestly sort of position instead of one with all of that power and responsibility. It is said that he wanted the position of archdeacon, which would have seen him controlling where the donation money went. So apparently, in passing on this bishop position, he thought that if he gave this bishop position to his rival, then his rival should at least be grateful enough to give him the position he wanted. But of course, that did not happen. The new bishop gave away the seat that Theo wanted and instead gave him the position of being a humble cleric. This made Theo super angry, and this is when he thought that maybe the church isn't as holy as he once thought they were. This is when he decided to summon the help of Satan. He ended up signing a contract with Satan in his own blood. He denounced Jesus and the Virgin Mary, and it is said that, with the help of Satan, he was once again voted into the bishop position, and this time he accepted. At this point in time, it is said that he felt so guilty he confessed to this deal with the devil, and the priest who he confessed to decided that they should burn the blood-signed contract. For a second, Theo looked up, but then suddenly he collapsed and died. Many people believe that it was because he had broken his contract with Satan.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the Demon on the Veranda story. This story takes place in a small village in India when the storyteller was 16 years old and living in a boarding school. All the girls slept in a big hall, and one night one of the other girls, named Malty, woke her up around 1 a.m. as Malty wasn't feeling too well. She goes to get some water and went outside on the veranda with Malty to try and help her feel better, as she was feeling very nauseous. She looked to the right and saw the far end of the veranda, and there was only one light, and the rest of the light was all coming from the moon. After a while of comforting Malty, she looked up to the right again and saw a kind of cat-like figure, but after a closer look, this cat had the head of a human and was bald with big eyes. She tried to convince herself that her eyes were deceiving her, but it began getting closer and she could see it more clearly. She was frozen with fear, and by the time this creature was around 10 meters away from her, it let out a meow sound that absolutely terrified her. She screamed, grabbed Malty, and got both of them back into the hall where everyone was still sleeping. This of course woke everyone up though, and the warden came over to see what all the commotion was about. She asked the warden not to make any loud sounds and begged her not to open the door. Everyone in the hallway looked outside and saw this shadowy creature moving before it just disappeared. To this day, she still isn't exactly sure what she saw, but she's glad she has never encountered it again. In our number 8 spot today, we have this sleep paralysis demon. This story comes from the Reddit user JStation666, and this is what they had to say about their demon encounter. I was laying in bed and fell asleep, and I woke up not being able to move or scream. I tried my best and it went on for about 5 minutes. It stopped, but after that I felt hands around my throat trying to choke me. I look up and all I see is a very tall black outline of a figure with flaming hair, and I could feel its long finger-like claws around my neck. The next morning I get up and there's red marks around my neck of what looks like very large hands. Sadly, I didn't take a picture when I should have, but after, it's hard for me to get to sleep in a dark room. I feel like I would have thought this was just a scary case of sleep paralysis, but the waking up with hand marks around their throat truly is very scary and kind of unexplainable. I am glad that they made it through this frightening situation. In our number 7 spot today, we have this eye-changing demon. This story comes from the Reddit user Katzabar from a time when they were around 11 or 12 years old. He starts off with explaining that they moved apartments a lot growing up, and no matter where they went, entities would always find him, and he also tells us that he had bright blue eyes, like his mother's, which will be important later. They moved into a new apartment and things immediately began to go poorly. He had a dream where he was in a bright white room and there was a beast on the ceiling that looked into his eyes and roared. The roar obviously frightened him and he woke up screaming, which of course woke up his mother, who rushed to his side. His mother was also very frightened, not only because she woke up to the sound of her son screaming, but because his scream did not sound like a little boy's, but was like the scream of a grown man. If this whole situation wasn't already strange enough, after this dream, his eyes turned from that bright blue color to a hazel color and have never changed back to blue. If that really is true, I have no idea how that happened, and that is honestly pretty crazy. In our number 6 spot today, we have this gray skin demon. This story comes from Pink Magic 724 on Reddit and is about a night they had a few years ago while still in college. Pink Magic's best friend of many years was in town, so they went out for a dinner to catch up and spend some time together. They, of course, end up getting a bit caught up, as best friends do, and before they know it, it is around 2 a.m. and definitely time for them to head home. Pink Magic's friend was the one who drove, so they headed off to Pink Magic's house. They're at an intersection waiting for the light to turn green when Pink Magic turns their head and looks out the window into the car next to them. This is when she sees the person next to them is looking directly at them, but they have gray skin, completely black eyes with no white, and they are smiling, but their teeth are long and sharp. Whoever or whatever this thing is, it will not break eye contact. Pink Magic tries to scream, but no sound will come out, and eventually the friend sees the creature too and immediately speeds out of there. To this day, neither of them like to talk about it, and neither of them are quite sure what exactly they witnessed. In our number 5 spot today, we have this demon in your mind. This story comes from Sylvie on Reddit and starts off a few years ago after an argument with a friend. This friend was really upset, so Sylvie went to bed, definitely not feeling great about what had just happened and Sylvie's behavior that led to this argument. About halfway through the night, Sylvie thinks that they had a dream, but they can't for sure say because they remember it so clearly. Sylvie woke up and had a knife in their hand, and their room was illuminated by the moonlight. As they looked around the room, they saw on the wall some words that looked like they were written in blood. Sylvie looked around the room again when something caught her eye. There was some sort of creature in the dark corner of the room that looked like one of those deep sea fish with the scary eyes and the really sharp teeth. I think they're called anglerfish. As soon as Sylvie saw this creature, the moonlight in the room changed to a flashing orange light, and this is when Sylvie definitely woke up in a cold sweat. Sylvie chalked it up to just a really scary dream and went and got ready for school and went about their day, but they just could not shake this feeling. After the first period was over, Sylvie was feeling really anxious and they reached up to the cross necklace they were wearing when a voice spoke in their head. The voice said, "God won't save you." Sylvie said that they had a few more incidents with this demon, but after firmly telling it to leave and using their religion and faith as a guide and a protection, they have luckily been demon-free ever since. In our number 4 spot today, we have the demon in the basement. This story comes from the Reddit user DreamGuy72 and starts off in his first apartment in the summer of 1992 in Casper, Wyoming on none other than Elm Street. The apartment was a basement suite where Dreamguy and his boyfriend lived, and their friends occupied the main floor suite above them. One day, Dreamguy was home alone and was repainting the main bedroom when he decided to take a break. After he had a drink, he headed back into the main bedroom, but this is when all of his hairs stood up. He saw that there was something painted on the opposite wall from the one that he had been painting. His heart was absolutely pounding as he walked up to the writing, and this is where he saw that the paint was still wet and dripping down the wall. The paintbrush he had been using was exactly where he left it, and there wasn't any paint on the floor. The words just said, "I am here." He of course got out of there as quickly as possible, and when he told his boyfriend later, he just kind of dismissed it. A few months go by and Dreamguy and his boyfriend get home after a long day of both of them being out of the house all day. Dreamguy heads to the shower to get ready for bed, and as he's in the shower, he hears the bathroom door open and close. He of course just assumes it's his boyfriend, and he's rinsing the conditioner out of his hair when he asks his boyfriend if he is joining him in the shower, and that's when he hears the response, "Sounds good to me," but it is not his boyfriend's voice. He then feels ice-cold hands grab his shoulders and spin him around as he opens his eyes to see that no one else is there. He of course bolts it out of the bathroom, and he's now in the front room trying to catch his breath when he sees his boyfriend shaking, pointing to the bathroom, saying he saw it go in there. It's safe to say that Dreamguy didn't live there for much longer, and I am very glad he made it out of this apartment and lived to tell the tale. In our number 3 spot today, we have this lady ghost demon story. This story comes from the Reddit user 7-Leg Spider, and they really just dive in. Basically, for several years, Spider saw what they thought was just a lady ghost every night at the door of the closet. It happened for so long that Spider just got used to it and even started saying goodnight to her. Spider says she didn't look bad or rotten, she was just a lady with pale skin and dark hair. Anyway, after a few years of this, Spider finally tells a friend at school about the lady. This friend, of course, didn't believe the story right away, but the next day at school, he tells Spider that this lady tried to hurt him while he was sleeping. Now, Spider didn't believe the friend and thought he was just playing a prank. Some more time goes by and Spider decides to tell another friend about the lady, and the same thing happens where the next day she comes and tells Spider that the lady had tried to hurt her while she was sleeping. The first friend and the second friend didn't even know each other, so it's not like they could have been conspiring, which made Spider believe his first friend was telling the truth. Then, a while after that, Spider is on a video chat with a friend and they're talking about the paranormal when they both see something run across the screen. They chalk it up to just being a computer glitch, and Spider starts telling his friend about the lady, and then Spider begins to get extremely dizzy, like they're going to pass out. After it goes away, Spider tells their friend that they're okay, and the friend replies that they were out of it for at least a full minute, and that he could feel that someone was there trying to hurt Spider. I'm really glad that Spider and all the friends ended up being okay, and I really hope that they found a way to get rid of this lady demon. In our number 2 spot today, we have ZOZO. This story comes from Reddit user Archaic Alchemy, who we'll call A. When A was 22, they were staying with their sister, and one night they had a couple of good friends over to hang out, and they decided to play around with a Ouija board, which is always the start of a good demon story. A had read about people encountering an entity called ZOZO, and A really wanted some proof that things exist beyond our physical realm, so they wanted to use the Ouija board. Everyone places their hands on the planchette, and A calls out to ZOZO. It took a few attempts before anything happened, but then the planchette began to move in figure eights. No matter what was asked, it just kept moving in figure eights until it finally spelled out M-A-M-A. That's us, we're MA. Maybe they were talking about our channel. A kept asking who they were talking to, and eventually they spelled out ZOZO, and then things really escalated. The planchette was taken to the letters to spell out kill you, and when A asked who, ZOZO spelled out one of the friends' names. They didn't take it seriously and kept asking more questions, and one friend made the mistake of insulting ZOZO. The planchette begins frantically moving through the alphabet backwards over and over before it just stops. Then the energy in the room completely drops, and A knows that this means ZOZO has manifested itself. Suddenly, A begins to laugh maniacally with no control over it. A could feel ZOZO's presence inside and could feel ZOZO turning all of this hatred and anger towards the friend that had been named before. A's emotions suddenly completely switch and they begin crying uncontrollably before again suddenly snapping back to anger. A's head turns involuntarily to look at the friend with a menacing grin as A pushes the planchette towards the friend. The friend decides it's rightfully time to leave, and shortly after they left, A felt like they regained control and ZOZO's presence had disappeared. I'm so glad that nothing even crazier happened and that ZOZO wasn't able to harm this friend. In our number 1 spot today, we have VELGROD. This story comes from the Reddit user Wheezy Donkey. Since he was a child, he's had interactions with a demon he knows as VELGROD. He first noticed the demon during the night as he was trying to fall asleep. It would continue saying his name quietly over and over again. This happened about once a month on a random night as he was trying to fall asleep, and he tried to ignore it, but every time it happened, the voice was a little louder because it was getting closer. One Friday night, he heard the voice and realized it was right at the end of his bed. He was frozen in fear, and every other night, if he waited long enough, the demon would just leave, but this time it wasn't happening. He found a lot of courage and lifted the blanket to inspect what he hoped was just his overactive imagination, but what he saw was too real for him to believe it was just imagination. This creature was tall and lanky with the yellow eyes of a reptile. His eyes were also bulging and very far apart. The creature apparently appeared as though he had been burned all over his body as he had charred and blistered skin. When the creature opened its mouth, it revealed its long lizard-like tongue that descended to its chest. In his right hand, he had a cane he was using to keep himself from falling over, but the cane was covered in barbed wire. In his other hand, VELGROD was holding the Bible that was on the nightstand. When he held the Bible up into the air, it was immediately engulfed in flames that left nothing but ash. VELGROD kept eye contact the entire time as he used his foot to spread the ashes across the floor in a certain pattern, at the same time hissing menacingly. VELGROD then turned and began to walk away towards the door and down the stairs. Wheezy Donkey sat frozen with fear for a while before working up the courage to inspect the ash on the floor. When he finally did, he saw that the ash spelled out, "Hell is below you." Ooh, that was creepy.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Dreams. This is a story from somebody named Jake P, and they wrote, quote, "My buddy and I found a Ouija board at my girlfriend's house. We were really bored, so we went to this graveyard by my house to see if it would actually work. As suspected, nothing happened. We brought the board back to my house and didn't think anything of it." I feel like that's like the classic story. Just when the Ouija board hears you talking smack, that's when things always start to go crazy though. Jake continues on saying, quote, "The next day, strange things began happening. Out of nowhere, my friend started having sleep paralysis every time he spent the night at my house, despite never having it before. The first time he saw a tall woman with long black hair standing in the corner of the room facing the wall. The next time he was asleep on the couch and he saw the same woman standing at my open door looking directly into my room." I don't know what demon lady they summoned, but I hope they did everything they could to get rid of her. Sounds an awful lot like the bent neck lady, and we all know how well that went. In our number 9 spot today, we have Woken Up. This story comes from someone named Justin, and one night Justin and some friends decided to try their hand at contacting the spirit world through a Ouija board. They began to ask questions, but instead of the planchette moving to certain letters, it began to move to all four corners of the board, making a sort of X before it just started to go in circles. Justin and his friends decided to call it a night with the board, but not too long after this day, Justin decided to try again with a different friend. The planchette began to move in strange patterns again, but this time Justin said it felt like some sort of hex. Later that night, as he was sleeping, he all of a sudden out of nowhere felt some sort of forceful hand grab his arm, which of course jolted him awake. Once awake, he couldn't see anyone or anything around him, and everyone in his house was peacefully asleep. In our number 8 spot today, we have ALEISTER CROWLEY. This man is quite well known for being the leader of an occult group, and this really does stem back even into his childhood. It is said that quite early on, ALEISTER started calling himself the Beast and the Antichrist, and he is even quoted as saying that God and Satan fought over his soul. In one of his books he wrote, quote, "I was in the death struggle with self. God and Satan fought for my soul those 3 long hours. God conquered. Now I have only one doubt left. Which of the twain was God?" Many people believe that perhaps he made a deal with Satan, but it is possible that these are just rumblings based on ALEISTER's teachings and beliefs. In our number 7 spot today, we have The Basement. This story comes from someone named Vince, and it has to do with a time he played with a Ouija board. He didn't really expect much to happen and was just sort of going along with it, but during the time using the board, the lights began to flicker and the air around Vince and his friends got quite cold. This is when they knew that something more serious was going on. The demon began to communicate with them through the board, and it told them its name, which Vince says seemed like a sort of Russian name. When they asked how the dark spirit got there, they explained that they had been killed. Vince explains that he and his friends took a break from the board, but they didn't remember to close the circle before they left, which, if you're not familiar with Ouija boards, is a huge mistake. Once they all returned back to the basement where they left the board, they could feel the heavy energy in the room, and they came to find that everything was in complete disarray. Books were thrown about, things were sprawled on the floor, but the only thing that hadn't been touched was the board, which still sat perfectly still in the center of the room, just how they had left it. Victor ends his story by saying, quote, "Upon looking at a mirror that we had nearby, the eye of the Ouija board was moving sporadically in its reflection." In our number 6 spot today, we have The Text. Okay, so this story isn't like others on this list, and it's one of the strangest I've ever heard. So basically, this person who was, on a dating app receives a text message one day from one of the guys that they were talking to that says, quote, "I've been thinking about summoning Satan to impress you." Okay, personally I would run the other way, but turns out these are texts some people are just waiting around to receive. When they followed up the text, the person said again, quote, "No, I'm not kidding. Unless I told you when I was drunk, I legitimately sold my soul to him in January 2013. Turns out this guy really meant it. Of course, this person needed to know more, and as it turns out, they got the full story. So basically, this guy explained the entire procedure of selling your soul. He said that it's simple, you just have to write a letter, sign it in your blood, perform a sort of ritual, and then some sort of physical mark will show up on your body like a scratch, and according to this guy, Your wish has just come true. Apparently after this guy had done all of that, he said that he laughed in a voice that wasn't his own, and since then all of his desires have been coming true. This story is weird, but apparently it really is that easy. Definitely wouldn't recommend trying it though, just in case, you know? In our number 5 spot today we have The Entity. This story starts off hot when the storyteller explains that they have used a Ouija board, and since doing so, they clearly have opened their home up to some sort of evil entity who hasn't exactly been kind. They say, quote, "It started out with that feeling like you're being watched, and doors are closing, and you hear footsteps on the hardwood when you're home alone, and it progressed slowly into being kept awake by something shaking the bed or pulling off your covers, sometimes even whispering your name. The board would disappear for days on end, then show up in places you never would have put it. I became obsessed with it. Then it was a black mass in the corner of the room, or the silhouette of a man watching you from the doorway. After that, it escalated pretty quickly. I had my hair pulled, fingers pricked, scratched." They go on to explain that sometimes while they're trying to sleep, they find themselves unable to move and can feel the entity whispering in their ear in what they say is Latin. They explained that they have since had their house blessed and are hoping that this keeps the demon at bay. In our number 4 spot today we have Jack Parsons. Jack was a man who was born just a few years prior to the Wright brothers flying the first airplane, and being born at a time like that had him growing up dreaming of and reading sci-fi novels about rocket ships taking people to space. It is said that this love of rocket ships and these dreams of going to space are what led to him summoning the devil in order to make a deal. Jack wanted to sell his soul in exchange for a rocket ship. This deal didn't end up working, but Jack continued to study science as he grew older. Later in his life he stumbled upon the teachings of ALEISTER CROWLEY that we talked about before, and this is when he tried his hand at summoning things again. This time he tried to summon a goddess named Babylon that was said to possibly help men get to the moon one day. Technically, in some ways, it worked because Jack Parsons ended up helping create the jet fuel that is said to still be used today. Maybe it was the deal with the devil, maybe it was the goddess, or maybe it was just good old passion and drive that did it. I guess it all depends on what you believe. In our number 3 spot today we have The Mistake. This story starts off with the storyteller and their wife and this new home that they had moved into. They both noticed some weird things happening around the house, and this led to them getting a Ouija board in the hopes that maybe they could get some answers as to what may be happening here. What they didn't realize before using the board, which is pretty common, is that these boards open the door to communication for anyone. Anything lurking on the other end can answer the call, and sometimes it's not the spirit you're hoping for. While using the board, they ended up contacting some sort of entity that didn't give them very clear answers, and things were feeling kind of vague. Near the end of their Ouija experience, they had the planchette just suddenly fly off the board despite neither of them touching it. After this experience, however, things got so bad that the pair had to break their lease and move. They explained that there were radios and TVs turning on by themselves all the time, they would find taps running when no one had left them like that, they could hear disembodied voices around their home, objects were moving, and the storyteller's wife even said that she had found the storyteller possessed one night, but he has no memory of it. In our number 2 spot today we have The Artist. Back in 1677, an artist named Christoph Heismann was working on a castle in Austria. He was so talented at his job that he had been commissioned by the nobles to do this work. There were rumblings about how he may have sold his soul to the devil, but no one was sure of it until it is said that Christoph confessed. He said he had 9 years prior and that he regretted it very much now and actually wanted an exorcism. They demanded to know if he was a practicing witch, but in the end it was decided that he was not, and that instead the devil just had a very strong hold on him. The local priest began giving Christoph exorcisms, and during these sessions Christoph explained that he had these intense visions where he was coming face to face with the devil, who was in the form of a dragon. The dragon was holding the contract that held Christoph's soul, and this is when he was able to rip it out of the dragon's talons. When he woke up, it seemed as though he was cured. After this, he began painting pictures of the devil, and he even painted a story with multiple panels that told the story of how he sold his soul and how they helped him get it back. In our number 1 spot today we have This Is Not a Game. This story is said to have taken place over a decade ago, and it starts off when the storyteller's sister had some friends over and they were in the basement watching a scary movie when they decided to start playing around with the Ouija board. Things weren't going exactly as they anticipated, and they all started getting frustrated at the board and began to hurl some insults toward it, calling it fake and things like that. At this point they turned their attention back to the movie and away from the board, but it soon became clear that someone was in fact listening. All of a sudden the lights and all of the electricity goes out and it's just pitch black. The TV suddenly turns back on, but it's just blaring static. The TV shuts off again and turns back on, but it's just a black screen. Suddenly words appear on the screen that reads, "This is not a game anymore." They all ran out of the house as quickly as they could, and that was definitely the last time any of them touched a Ouija board. It isn't exactly clear who or what they summoned, but whatever it was, it certainly was not playing around.